There's an explosion of anxiety and depression in young people. What is the cause of this thing?
Kids spend a lot of time, girls in particular, on social media. Believe it or not, social media is very isolating. And if we're not in healthy relationship with the most important people in our lives, our family members, then we're really off kilter and something goes wrong.
Are we too quick to push children into therapy, do you think?
Yes, I think we are, because I think that parents fail to recognize how critical they are in their child's development, emotionally, physically, mentally. But any child who goes to a therapist is going to be quickly followed by mom and dad, because you can't treat a child in isolation.
What is the biggest mistake that parents make, and how do you avoid them? I'm Raymond Arroyo. Welcome to Arroyo Grande, where we dive into the wild currents of this culture and pull out perspectives and practical life lessons from incredible culture makers. This week, I'm so excited to be joined by Dr. Meg Meeker. She is one of the nation's leading parenting authorities, a pediatrician, best-selling author, podcaster. She's helped countless families, guiding parents through the stages of their children's development and counseling the kids themselves. She shares some incredible wisdom, as you'll hear. If you're thinking about a family or if you have children of your own, we're going to tackle how social media can stunt a kid's development, how you actually choose the spouse of your children, and the biggest parenting mistake you can make as a mom or dad and how to avoid it. This is a conversation full of advice that you need today, laced with real encouragement. And our How It Ends, our historical flashback, reveals the lasting power of a very famous mother. Stay tuned for that. Here's Dr. Meg Meeker. Dr. Meeker, first of all, thank you so much for being here. Look, we've known each other a long time from your very first book, Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. Let's do a quick overview here. How critical is a father to his daughter's development, and why? I mean, dads are always portrayed as the goofball characters in all the movies, Meg. Why are they important in the family?
Well, we know that a father's the most important man in a daughter's life. He's the one who teaches her how men should behave, what she should expect from boys, teachers, boyfriends, and so forth. And he really is the one who gives her tremendous amount of self-confidence and self-esteem. If you look across all issues that girls can have, depression, anxiety, ADHD, difficulty finishing school, and so forth, the girls that have a dad involved in their lives do extremely well across all aspects. And so a dad really is critical, very, very critical.
Conversely, how important is a mother to her son's growth and becoming a man? This is something people rarely talk about as well, Meg.
Yeah, you're right. You know, there's something about that cross-sex relationship that has a uniqueness that the same-sex relationship doesn't have. So father to daughter and mother to son. A mother's very, very important, particularly during the first 10 years. But after the first 10 years, then we found that a dad is critical for the healthy development and moving in from boyhood to manhood, because boys really need that relationship with a father, and they need a role model is critical.
What have you seen in your practice when the mother is absent, for instance, in a young boy's life? What happens there?
Well, I think that, you know, there's a difficulty with attachment, because boys typically and girls typically attach to the mother in the early years of life. More difficult for them to attach to their father, and maybe fathers to them. So what we see is the difficulty having that sort of intimacy, trust, and love exchange can be hard for kids. And if they don't have it in the early years, it's harder for them to get it later in the later years.
You know, Meg, something we've talked about before, and it's fascinating to me, and you see it play out in not only people I know, but your clients I know as well. Tell me how a parent can actually shape the selection of their child's spouse. I mean, they don't do it with words or deliberately, but the child does it because of their example and place in their life. Explain that.
It's fascinating. A child, let's talk daughters and fathers.
Okay.
A daughter watches every move her father makes, not because she's necessarily interested in her dad, but because she needs to know how he feels about her. So in those early years, as she watches her dad, she's taking in messages. My dad likes me. My dad thinks I'm pretty. My dad thinks I'm capable. And all of those begin to shape her identity. As she gets older, that is in her. And there's a psychological phenomenon where we as humans tend to return to what we know. And that's why you see girls who've, been abused as children marry an abuser, and girls who've had a great relationship with their dad end up having a great relationship with their father, because you fall back on what you know, and it's all subconscious, which is very interesting. So it's important for fathers to realize that when the girls are young, so they can really pay attention to how they're treating her, talking to her, affection, and so forth.
So what you're really
it's going to
saying,
make a big difference in the guy she marries.
yeah, I mean, what you're really saying is the man that you are in the household, the father that you are in the household, will be played out in the next generation, in the man that girl chooses as her spouse or as her partner.
Absolutely. And, girls don't want to hear that they're marrying a guy that's very much like their dad, but it's true.
Wow. Does it apply to boys as well? Do they marry someone like their mother?
It really can. And we find that boys will be more attracted to somebody, again, that they're familiar with, a girl or a woman who treats them like their mother did, talks to them, is nurturing and kind. And so it does tend to work that way as well.
There's an explosion, Megan. I know you're seeing this in your practice. There's an explosion of anxiety and depression in young people. What is the cause of this thing? I mean, we were talking earlier. You deal with this, I know, in your practice on a daily basis.
I do. And it's disturbing because I've been at this a long time and I've never seen the prevalence of anxiety and depression that I do now. I think that what's happening is that kids feel lonelier than they've ever felt before. And we think, well, why is that? They're connected all the time to friends. They're really not. Kids spend a lot of time, girls in particular, on social media. Believe it or not, social media is very isolating. It's not a real relationship. Kids feel very lonely. Girls feel very lonely when they're on social media, even though they're texting back and forth. It's not real. And they spend so much time doing that they're not spending enough time with their parents face to face, dialoguing, touching, hugging. And so I think they're very lonely, and that causes them to feel very anxious and depressed, because we're born to live in community. We're born for relationship. God tells us that. And if we're not in healthy relationship with the most important people in our lives, our family members, then we're really off kilter and something goes wrong. And that's what kids are feeling today.
Meg, what do you tell parents? I mean, what can they do if this child is anxious and depressed? And how much of this is a reflection of the anxiety from the parents themselves?
Well, that's a great question. I will say usually, as I sort of unpack things with kids, I find that if a child is anxious, there's usually a person very close to them, i.e. mom or dad, who's anxious as well. Because anxiety feeds on itself. It feeds on other people around you. But what do I tell parents? First of all, I say, what is going on in the home? Is there a lot of stress in the home? Often that'll do it. Dad lost his job, mom's working too much, the parents never see the child. And so I say, they said, well, I need to go to a therapist. I said, let's try this first. Your child needs you more than a therapist. Your child needs more time with you. So let's amp up the amount of one-on-one time that you have with your kids. And often that's a real game changer, because as parents look back over the past weeks or month, they really realize they're not spending much time with their kids, because we're a generation of people that just want to do as much as we can in a day. The problem is the kids and their relationship with us are the casualty. So parents really need to step up their time with their kids.
You said something there I want to pick up on. You said you don't need a therapist, you need more time with that child. Are we too quick to push children into therapy, do you think? Because that can become its own rut, if you will. I mean, where does therapy end, I always wonder.
Well, exactly. Yes, I think we are, because I think that parents fail to recognize how critical they are in their child's development, emotionally, physically, mentally. And I think that whenever something goes wrong with a child, rather than saying, oh, I could be part of this, I'm part of the solution or remedy, but they don't know what to do, or they don't want to take the time to do it, so they just give them to a therapist. But any child who goes to a therapist is going to be quickly followed by mom and dad, because you can't treat a child in isolation. You have to treat the unit.
How much of this anxiety and this depression is caused by social media? How dangerous is these devices in your estimation?
Huge. And actually, it's just not my experience, but we do have great studies that show that the rise in social media use parallels the rise in depression.
Wow.
It's almost, 1-to-1. And so we do know that the longer girls are on social media, the more they're at risk for depression, severe depression. And there's a direct correlation there. And this is why I'm so anti-social media, because I have literally seen kids in my practice who've tried to commit suicide and will admit to me that social media played a part. They felt they weren't good enough, they weren't pretty enough, they weren't popular enough, they didn't have the right boyfriend, and it really takes them down.
You call this comparison culture, that's what is created, particularly for these girls. How do you break that loop?
Yeah. Well, I think that because you're absolutely right, it is comparison culture, because every girl is looking at her friends on social media and she's never enough and so forth. So how do you break the loop? I think that it's important, first of all, if your daughter is on social media, she's already on it, then you need to talk to her about this. You need to shorten the amount of time that she's on social media. I feel very strongly, if parents out there they haven't given their daughters a cell phone, an iPhone, that they can give them a phone or a watch that doesn't connect to the internet. The longer you can wait, the better off it is for your daughter, because you can help a 16 or 17-year-old girl understand what's going on in the comparison culture. Much harder to do with a 12 or 13-year-old.
Well, yeah, I know there's that movement, wait till 8th. You think, wait till 8th grade to give them a smartphone. You
Correct.
think that's too early. Why?
Too young. It's too young. And I'll tell you why. Because a 13, 14-year-old girl is so incredibly vulnerable. She'll believe things that people tell her. And I think we talked about it. Social media is the number one place where girls get sex trafficked. And a 14-year-old girl is far more influential than a 17 or 18-year-old girl. And that's why I just like that more cognitive maturity in an older child, so she can deal with these things a lot better. This is really hard, dangerous stuff. And I think that parents know that on some level, but part of them feels, well, my daughter, she's a straight A student. I can trust her. She's great. Doesn't matter. More brain cells are more brain cells. And she needs a little more frontal lobe development in order to navigate this tough.
Well, and we never talk about that, Meg, that those front lobes really don't close and fully develop until what, 25, 21?
Yes. I always tell parents, your job is to raise a healthy 25-year-old, because the brain really isn't fully developed until then. And I think that we tend to think it develops earlier because we push our kids to act more adult-like too early. And that tricks us into believing that our kids are actually older than they are. We put far too much trust in our kids, trust to make adult decisions when they're too young.
Meg, what's the impact of that constant visual and audio stimulation? I mean, I see kids when I travel, they're running through Instagram feeds for hours on a plane, for hours. How do you counteract that?
If you think about it, kids are living in a constant fight or flight mode. The stimulation, just as you said, auditory and visual stimulation, it's too much for their body system and it burns them out. And when they get burned out, they have a hard time thinking. They're fuzzier, their moods go down, they're antsier, they have a harder time sleeping. And again, what I encourage parents to do is they need to carve out some time in their child's day where it's quiet. There's no stimulation. They sit with a book on their lap that has words on a page that don't jump and move and shout.
Yeah.
So,
And when do you recommend? I mean, we talked about this, about the young person getting a smartphone. What's the alternative? I mean, I know there are these other, non-smartphones where you can still stay in touch with your family if you have an emergency. And I know you've dealt with this even in your own family with your own grandkids.
yeah, I have, because now that we don't have a family phone where kids can call and you pick up and say the receiver and say hello, it is important for kids to be able to connect with their parents. For instance, if they're a soccer practice and mom forgets to pick them up or whatever. I've been there, done that with
Yeah,
my
me too.
grandson. But anyway, and he didn't have a watch. But anyway, the Gab phone and the Gizmo phones are terrific because they look just like an iPhone. You can get a watch that looks just like an Apple Watch. Kids can call their parents. They can maybe text their parents. They cannot take photos. It doesn't go on the internet. They can't have social media. So there's that connection there for safety, and mom can always get hold of them. But they don't have the dangerous risk. And something like a Gab phone, you can increase the amount of exposure kids have to the internet over time. So it'll actually grow with your child. So you may start at 14, no internet, and at 17 go, okay, she can go. And so you actually, it grows with the child.
Yeah, you get more access as you grow and you're ready for that access, which I agree with you. I think these devices are way too freewheeling. I mean, you're throwing this child in the middle of everything. Talk to me a bit about how damaging the isolation is, Meg. I see this every day, particularly when I'm traveling, when I'm in New York, or even when I'm home in New Orleans. People have the earbuds on. Now they've got the Meta glasses. They're on the phone. Thousands of people could be on the street, but these people are actually all alone in their fake world. What is the solution here? I call it the bubble people. They're in their own little bubble.
Well, again, I think that it's really up to the parents, and parents can do this. They say, well, my child is on social media 3 or 4 hours a day, and that's not uncommon, believe it or not. I've had kids addicted. But what they need to do is say, okay, we're going to wean you down a little bit from 7 to 8 o'clock at night, from 8 o'clock at night to 9 o'clock. Nobody can be on their phone, and that means parents too. Because believe it or not, kids are bothered by parents being on their phones more than parents are bothered by their kids being on their phone. Because when a kid is around a parent who's not paying attention, they feel invisible and they feel that they're not worth their parents' time and attention. So it's really important that you make it a family plan. Okay, family quiet hour. We're going to play a game from 9 to 10 or 8 to 9. So you've got to begin to establish family rules for phones. Because then if everybody does it, then the teenager's less likely to gripe about having to do it.
Yeah, well, it's not just kids. I mean, the people I see with the earbuds and they're texting and they've got the Meta glasses and you're talking to these people in the gym or on the street. They're not even connecting with you. These are grown-ups, though, Meg. We're not talking about little kids here. But yeah, I guess the way you train the child is the way the adult turns out. And we're becoming increasingly isolated as people. And that deeply concerns me as somebody who wants to see a culture thrive and families grow, and you want good, healthy citizens.
And you think how it makes the people around the person using the device feel. It makes them feel that, again, they're not important. They're not important to say hello to shake hands with. They're just a non-entity. And and the other thing is, when kids are on their phones all the time or listening to music, they are in their private world, and mom and dad are not in that world. And that can be very, very dangerous. 10, 11-year-old boy, pornography's there. It will find him. All he has to do is Google trucks. And, the algorithm says, oh, this must be a boy. And then the pornography finds him. And of course, he's not going to say anything to his parents because he's very embarrassed and doesn't want his phone taken away. And so he just stays there and it finds him again and again. The same is true with girls, not necessarily pornography, but friends and people that she has no business talking to. Again, she lives in this private world that's very isolating. And anytime they're isolated from those who love them and those who can actually shape their identity, mom and dad and siblings, they start to fall apart. They
Wow.
literally just start to fall apart.
I personally think a child's social media should be monitored and I think patrolled. Friends of mine, though, say they need their privacy, Meg Meeker. You'd respond how? What would you tell those parents?
No, they don't. No, they don't. When you and I grew, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's a ruse. And I think that parents kind of use it as a cop out in a way because they don't want to take time to argue with a child about that should be no privacy, and B, they just don't want to argue with a child because they'll give pushback. They want their child to like them. They don't want any friction. But here's why your child cannot have privacy until they're gone. First of all, you need to keep them safe from themselves. They are kids who are just looking for trouble all the time, not consciously,
Yeah.
but these are kids who are ready to, fall off the rails at any given moment if they're on social media, video games. So you need to protect the child from himself. And so when kids come at you and say, that's not fair, this is my private phone. Well, first of all, parents, you own the phone. And second of all, you can't have a phone unless I'm allowed to see it because there's no secrets. You and I, don't keep secrets from our spouses. Walt can come to my phone and look at anything, anytime. That's what a healthy relationship does. So if kids want a healthy relationship with their parents and their peers, needs to be open for parents, or else don't give them a cell phone. I'm really a bugger about it. Don't let me have a cell phone.
Tell me about the danger of Instagram and some of these social media sites. I mean, this is like rife with groomers who are, trafficking, and so many of these victims we read about, Meg, they first encountered the people who would abuse them through these sites online.
Exactly. Think about this, Raymond. You've got a 13, 14-year-old girl who doesn't spend much one-on-one time with her parents or face-to-face. So she's living in isolation. She's lonely. Now she gets on a social media and a 50 or 60-year-old guy knows she's lonely. So he gets in there and he starts to play her. Oh, I'm a 16-year-old boy and you're just so sweet. I see what you're writing. That girl falls for that so fast. I can't tell you how many times. It does not take much to influence a 13, 15, even 16-year-old girl, because every girl wants to think they're beautiful, that someone understands them. Oh, I understand you, your parents don't. And, you and I would go, what are you talking about? You're a stranger.
Right.
14-year-old girl doesn't care. All she knows is this guy's telling her she's wonderful.
Well, and they're living
then
in
they
their
start
heads.
passing back and forth pictures, and that's really dangerous.
Yeah, well,
Sorry.
They're living in their heads, and as you said, they're alone. And when you're alone, you're in a loop. And if someone's feeding that loop or feeding you new lines, and look, it's not only young girls. I just read a story where some poor, 65-year-old woman was sending money to Brad Pitt. It's not Brad Pitt, but it's somebody posing as Brad Pitt. So they fall for this stuff.
My husband has a patient who was 60, and she announced that she was leaving to go to Europe to marry some guy. And he said, well, have you met him? No, but I've seen his picture. Well, have you sent him money? Yes, because his mother was in the hospital.
Oh.
And she literally was ready to get on the plane the next day. And he said, ma'am, there's a problem here. You cannot go. So it's really remarkable. She was a widow and she's very lonely. Loneliness crushes your spirit. And that's where, if you don't even have a relationship with God, you're floating, you're sort of in no man's land. And then you compound that with loneliness in the midst of your family. Surviving is hard. It's very hard. And it's hard to articulate, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. But loneliness is a killer, and being on social media makes kids terribly lonely and terribly vulnerable to manipulation.
Now how it ends. Sometimes a mother can make you immortal. When she was 45, Anna McNeil lost her husband, but she was deeply religious and devoted to her children, especially young James, who had left their Massachusetts home and relocated in London. Now, James was a painter and a bohemian. Oscar Wilde said of James, he spells art with a capital I. At the time, James was living with his redheaded mistress, a woman named Jo Hifferman. Joe apparently had to clear out of James' apartment to make room for his mother. Upon her arrival, Anna wrote, "God answered my prayers for his welfare by leading me here." She chastised her son for his randy ways and became his caretaker, occasional art dealer, and much more. In 1871, James was commissioned to paint a portrait of Maggie Graham. She was the daughter of a member of Parliament. James had already prepared the canvas, and after the girl missed several appointments, he wanted to paint someone. So James made his mother, Anna, his subject. She later wrote, "I stood bravely 2 or 3 days whenever he was in the mood for studying me, as his pictures are studies, and I stood as a statue, but realized it was too great an effort." Anna was so exhausted after days of standing that James finally relented and let his mother sit in a rocking chair. Anna later saluted her artist, who, quote, "is gently patient as he is never wearying in his perseverance, concluding to paint me sitting perfectly at my ease." James would later call the portrait of Anna, with her hands on her lap, "Arrangement in Gray and Black #1, because of the dark hues he used in the work. But you probably know it better as Whistler's Mother. It would become James McNeill Whistler's most famous and beloved work, and a living testament to the immortality that can await those who stay close to Mama. Now you know how it ends. Back to Meg Meeker. You mentioned it earlier about boys and the omnipresent pornography that really is all across the culture. It's not just online, it's everywhere. How does pornography distort the image those boys have of the other sex? How does it affect that and their expectations?
Well, it has a profound effect on a boy's ability to later on experience true intimacy, physical sexual intimacy, because after they see pornography, they become hardened to certain acts. They're stimulating at first, but then they get boring. So they have to go to more severe forms of pornography. And we know that, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And so bad, that's where they turn to child porn, because that gives them a little bit of a kick. So what it does is it interferes with the boy's ability to have healthy intimacy later on. It interferes with his sense of self and his own sexuality. He doesn't feel good about himself as a man, because what he's experienced over these years or months is that I'm not satisfied. So something's wrong with me. It affects his relationship with women because he objectifies the women. And often, always in pornography, women are put down. They're used, and they're used as just objects for a man's pleasure. Now, they wouldn't tell you that, but they are. So then a boy begins to see a woman as just an object for his pleasure. Everything becomes a mess. It absolutely becomes a mess. And this is why addiction can be so bad, and how it can take men a long time to wade out of this addiction, because it affects them on so many different levels.
And as a pediatrician who deals with body image in girls, and I know as the father of a daughter, this is important and it's an issue, and the expectations in boys. What is the impact of celebrities? Like we saw this Bianca Censori, Kanye West's wife, showing up literally naked at the Grammys, or Kim Kardashian posting these nearly naked posts daily, weekly. How does that affect young people and the kids seeing it, boys and girls?
Well, first of all, girls look at this and they say, wow, there's Beyonce. She has a lot of money. She's very popular. She's very beautiful. And if I want to be popular and beautiful and maybe rich one day, I need to look like her. I need to create my body to be like her, and I need to dress like her. And I need to be a sexy person. I see this all the time in grade school kids, in junior high kids. It's amazing. It's amazing. Our kids went to Catholic school where they had to be covered neck to knees. And I thought, that's good.
The uniforms are a good thing, Meg. It teaches a certain rigor.
They are. And then to a young boy, it's stimulating, because boys are so visually stimulated, and men. And Beyonce's not being nice to them. I don't like my husband to look at Beyonce because I can't compare with her. But fortunately, he can't compare with Brad Pitt either. But it's stimulating to men, and it's not fair because it changes their expectations of what they desire in a woman, and nobody can keep up with that.
Yeah.
So that's why it's really not fair to either girls or boys.
Okay, this is really important. What is the biggest mistake that parents make? Or I'll broaden it. What are the biggest mistakes parents make? And how do you avoid them?
I think the biggest mistakes parents make is trusting their child's ability to make adult decisions. I see this all the time because they believe their kid is a good kid, their kid is a smart kid, and he has much stronger character than his friends, and he doesn't lie, even though a lot of his friends lie, and he has good grades. But this is what I tell parents. The kids I really worry about are the good kids, particularly a good girl. If you have a 16, 17-year-old girl who's a good kid, close to her parents, good grades, I worry because this is a girl who can't say no. She doesn't want to hurt anybody's feelings. So she'll date the football player that's a year older than she is, and parents will be excited because he's so popular, and then she's going to do what he wants because she doesn't want to hurt his feelings. I hear that over and over. I can't say no to my boyfriend. He won't like me and he'll be hurt. And they can't, they're in over their head. So I think the biggest thing is that parents putting false trust in their kids because they fail to realize how limited their kids' cognitive and emotional growth is. They don't let them be children.
Yeah. And then we entrust them to teachers. We entrust them to therapists. We entrust them to everybody but ourselves, the parents.
Exactly. And we need to have more self-confidence and say, my child's struggling with this. I'm going to give it a go. She's got anxiety. She's got depression. And I have seen dads alone pull daughters through a depression and out of a depression by spending more time with them, having great conversations, and not going to a therapist. I had a girl whose parents wanted to send her camp out west because she was a bad boyfriend running around and so forth. And I said, let's wait. And I encouraged Dad, do me a favor, take her camping for a couple weeks. And do you know, at the end of 2 weeks, when they were in the middle of nowhere paddling a canoe and she's crying, she came home and didn't have to go to the camp out west. That's the power of a father. And dads need to grab that because they don't believe they have that kind of power.
Well, the culture diminishes dads so much, makes them feel like the goofball. They're always the goofball in movies, in film, on television. And I think that has sunk in at a certain level. And I think, well, my wife is the one who can handle this stuff. So dads kind of take a back seat. They're spectators in many cases.
Yep. They are. They're not only spectators, they're not only made that by movies and the media. I think we women have to take responsibility as well. We had 3 daughters and a son, and there were times where subconsciously, I didn't realize it, but that was sabotaging my husband. He'd be talking to the girls and so forth, and I'd be listening, and I'd go, no, that's not the way you talk to girls. And I'd swoop in and sort of take over the conversation. What is the message to our daughters? Dad doesn't understand. Only mom does. Get out of the way. So we mothers need to take a hard look at, are we sabotaging our husbands and their relationships with our kids unknowingly?
Wow. Anything else? Any other major mistake that parents make unwittingly or wittingly?
Yes, I think they don't spend enough time with their kids. I know that's a hard thing for parents to hear, but parents often ask me, I have a full-time job. My husband has a full-time job. We have a babysitter 50 hours a week. That child's going to have trouble. Kids are not made to be raised in institutions or just by nannies. I know I'm going to get a lot of hate mail for that, but that's okay. My job is to speak for children, not for their parents. Parents need to figure out a way, 2 working parents, you need to figure out a way where you tag team. My husband and I did that. Maybe you don't see each other as much for a period of time. Oh, well, you can survive better. So parents need to really be diligent about shifting their work schedule so they spend more time with their kids. You can't replace that.
Yeah, FaceTime with their children. Look, we're empty nesters now, and boy, do I feel it. And you look back and you go, oh, maybe I should have gone with them on that trip. Maybe I should have done that. That's what you always say to yourself. So you can't spend too much time with your children. That's I hope, if there's one message people take, I hope it's that one. Look, 77% of kids do not qualify, Meg, for military service physically. Have you seen a decline in overall health among your clients, among your patients?
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting now because we're going into a time period where we're going to start examining foods and what's in them. And we feel like, oh, there's too much fat, there's too much dye. This is our answer to obesity. No, it isn't. The reason we have overweight kids who are not in good physical condition is because we let them eat all day long. Parents want their kids to snack all the time. Kids don't need to snack. We're setting up very unhealthy eating habits for kids by saying second grade, third grade, fifth grade, have you had your snack? Kids should not eat every 2 hours. And then what happens, they get older and they put on weight, and the more weight you put on, the less you want to exercise. It's really hard to motivate a 15-year-old girl or boy to go exercise.
Wow.
So they get, the snowball starts to roll and accumulate, and pretty soon they have a hard time either dieting or exercising. So I really feel that we parents need to take charge. Again, it's like with cell phones. Don't put your child on a diet, put the whole family on a diet. You can't tell your kid to not eat after 7 o'clock at night if you're watching a movie at 9 with a bowl of popcorn. You just can't do that. And the other thing too is I think that parents don't want to say no to their kids. Kids beg for food all the time. And you have to be able to say, no, you cannot eat that. No, you can't go in the refrigerator. If, I know I sound like an old fuddy-duddy, but if it were an hour and a half before dinner when I was a kid, and if I went to eat a snack, my mother would say, you can't do that. We're going to have dinner. And so kids need to learn respect for food.
Yeah, and restraint.
Parents need to teach them that.
Yeah, restraint. It's not a bad thing. Personal self-mastery. And the other thing is, the kids are so sedentary today, Meg. We went outside. I was thinking when I was a kid, it would be hours and hours after school. We were climbing trees until it got dark. They'd have to pull us in the nighttime. The kids don't do that anymore. They sit in front of the screen all night.
All night. And so they sit and they go like this. And again, on so many different levels, it's very unhealthy. And I wonder if ADHD, is a result of that as well. It sounds ironic, but boys who are bouncy need a tree in their backyard. Just let them go. If they fall out and break their arm, oh, well, they're still going to be healthier than sitting there looking at something. We're so risk averse and we don't want our kids to get hurt to this. And we feel like they're safe if they're in front of a tablet or a computer or their phone. They're really not. So we need to really shift changing some behaviors with our kids. It's not that hard. Kids can adapt really quickly. Again, it's harder for us to go on a diet than it is for kids.
Yeah, I think I want to start Arroyo Grande adventures for both adults, couples, and their kids, so that, everybody wants to have an adventure, Meg. And it's like they've never been loosed to have those moments. I mean, I saw it with my kids. Did the gliding and skiing. They did all kinds of wacky whitewater rafting, things they'd never done before. And was it a little dangerous? Yeah. Life is dangerous, but it teaches you a certain resiliency, I think, and a confidence by getting over those fears and actually mastering something. And you know what? You have a good time.
You have a really good time, and kids need to be pushed and pressed into, not sports or things that, count towards college or whatever, but just activities where they're taking a risk, a safe risk, because you're the parent there and you're determining what's a healthy risk and what isn't. But to learn that they're stronger than they think. Mentally, they can get through that. They can hold on to a raft in those rapids, and they can be scared to death, but they get through the rapids. And what a great lesson for the kids.
And speaking of sports, you've worked and you've coached NFL players, which I did not know. What did they teach you about parenting and rage
Oh, so much, so much. And Raymond, full disclosure, I don't even understand how the game is played. But anyway, what I found is I was called in there because a lot of them grew up without fathers, and the only person they felt comfortable trusting was their mother. So I was a mother figure. So I really was brought into the intimate details of their lives, growing up and so forth. And what I found is that many of these elite athletes would say, I get paid millions of dollars to go out on the field and perform my craft extremely well and live just on the edge of explosion. So my rage works well for me. But then I come off the field and nobody tells me how to turn it off. So then they would go home and they didn't know how to talk to their wives. They didn't know how to talk to their kids. And so that's where I kind of came in and said, look, you're clearly a very skilled a person, a man who's highly disciplined. You need to transfer some of that discipline into parenting. I also realized that without fathers, they really felt lost, and in some ways, I think they were afraid of themselves because they've never gotten pushback during their teen years and their young adult years, and I really think that frightened them, and I could see how that would happen.
Yeah. Let's talk for a second about faith. I mean, this runs through every book you've ever written. How important is faith and religious practice, not only to a child, but to a family? And look, Meg, I have friends who say, I'm not going to baptize that kid because I want her to make her own decisions. Is that wise?
No, it's ridiculous. And here's why I say, because if as a child gets older, if they don't know anything about the Christian faith, Catholicism, how can they select it? So you have to teach them what is available, and then you have to teach them why you believe your Christian faith. We insist that kids learn math and English and writing and social science. And then they say, well, I don't need to teach them religion. Yes, you do, because that's part of learning. I mean, that's really, we have an obligation to teach our kids our values, and we need to teach them why we have faith and who God is and why we believe that Christ rose from the dead. They want to know that. I will tell you, kids are so open to talking about faith.
They are.
And again, they can choose when they're 25 or 30 to reject it. But if they don't have anything, there's nothing to reject. So what they'll do is they'll go and look for the easiest religion they can find and just fold into it. That's not a healthy, good thing, because faith in God is extremely important across all measures of, physical health and emotional health and staying in school and having good marriages and relationships. Those kids that had a secure relationship with God did better during the teen years and in their adult life. So, the science backs it all up. But again, when you think about kids living in isolation, if they don't have a relationship with God with them in that isolation, then they're really alone, and that's cruel to a kid.
Yeah. Before I let you go, Meg, I usually do an Arroyo Grande questionnaire with all my guests. I'm going to abbreviate it today because you've given us so much time and so much wisdom. I don't want to keep you. But what is the best advice you've ever been given?
Some of the best advice I've gotten, I got right out of my residency. I was working with an older pediatrician. It was probably my age at that time. I thought he was really old. But anyway, he said, never forget this. If you want to take good care of a patient, a child, you have to care for their parent, because the parent has the power. You come in and out of their lives. And I never forgot that. And that's why all of my books are written to parents. I can't tell you how many parents want me to write a book to their teenagers. And I say, first of all, no, because teenagers don't read books like mine.
Exactly.
And second of all, you have the influence. So I want to train you to have a profound influence on your kids. And that seems to work. So that's the best advice I'd gotten.
That is so wise. A friend of mine, Mike Friends, whenever he would interview people coming into his firm, he would ask them, what do you know that no one else knows? And I'll pose the same question to you before I let you go.
What do I know?
That no
Whew.
one else knows.
That no one else knows. Well, of course, I know the power of a dad in a child's life. I would like to think that I know the majesty of Christ better than anybody else, but I know that's not true. But that's the deepest joy I have in my life is that love and that intimacy. And I have that. And even though I have a great relationship with my husband, he has his own relationship with Christ and I have my own, and it bonds us together. But the mystery feels very, very personal.
Well, you know that saying, that the three-ply cord tied together, the husband, the wife, and God, is really inseparable. And I think we often forget one of those plies along the way. So thanks for reminding us of that. Dr. Meg Meeker, as always, thank you, and I hope you'll come back.
I'd love to. Thanks so much, Raymond.
Great. And listen to Dr. Meeker's podcast, which is exceptional. For parenting advice, she really gets into boundaries and practical things that we all need as parents and as people. Thank you, Meg.
Thank you.
Okay, here's the lesson that at least I drew from listening to Dr. Meeker. We underestimate our own power as parents, I think. And if you spend the time with your children, and not only your children, the people you love, the people at work, the people in your family, when you spend that time, you inevitably imprint your values, your thoughts, your deeply held beliefs onto that child or those people you love. And I think we don't often recognize that time spent can accomplish so much. We divert ourselves with social media. We get wrapped up in things that really don't matter. But those one-on-one relationships, that FaceTime, is essential. And if you believe Meg Meeker, and I do, powerful indeed. I hope you'll come back to Arroyo Grande soon. Why live a dry, narrow, constricted life when if you fill it with good things, it can flow into a broad, thriving Arroyo Grande? I'm Raymond Arroyo. Make sure you subscribe and like this episode. Thank you for diving in. Come back next time. Arroyo Grande is produced in partnership with iHeart Podcasts and is available on the iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts.